Welcome to our discussion today.
Yeah, glad you're joining us.
So imagine stepping into a movie theater, right? And the film is already like 2 hours in.
Right, you're just walking in completely blind.
Exactly. On the screen, the characters are just screaming at each other. The music is at this fever pitch. Buildings are literally coming down. And, the audience around you is actively cheering for one side or the other.
But you have absolutely no idea what the plot is.
None. You don't know who the characters actually are or, what happened in the first 2 hours to lead to this explosive climax.
I'm just watching the explosion.
Right. And honestly, that is exactly how it feels scrolling through social media or, well, watching the nightly news coverage of the Middle East right now.
Oh, 100%. It really does.
You are fed these highly charged plot points, but they feel completely devoid of any, grounded historical context.
Yeah, it creates this profound sense of historical whiplash. Really.
Whiplash is the perfect word for it.
Because we are constantly bombarded with these incredibly rigid narratives and, these weaponized buzzwords. And when you actually look closely, it becomes obvious that the foundational layers, like the actual documented history of the region, have been completely paved over.
Just totally buried.
Right. They're sacrificed in favor of, well, whatever particular geopolitical narrative is trending that day.
Right, on social media or wherever.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to basically bring in the jackhammers and pull up that pavement.
Let's do it.
We are taking a fascinating, incredibly positive, and just deeply historical look at the origins of the Israel-Palestine conflict.
And to be completely clear with you, the listener, right from the jump, we are navigating highly charged, politically and emotionally sensitive material today.
Definitely.
But our goal here isn't to, take a political side or tell you who to vote for or endorse specific viewpoints.
Right. That's not what this is about at all.
No. We are here to impartially report on the deeply researched content provided by a stack of incredible sources we've gathered.
And they are really, really phenomenal sources.
They are. We just want to convey the ideas, the historical arguments, and particularly the legal reasoning they use. Because honestly, the methodology they employ to unpack this conflict is just brilliant.
It truly is brilliant. I mean, the sources we are synthesizing today, they feature this fascinating cross-section of highly analytical minds.
Right, we've got a great mix.
We do. We have a meticulous legal and historical breakdown from a federal district judge.
Okay.
Then we have the sharp geopolitical analysis of a prominent political commentator. And finally, the deep time perspective of a dedicated author and historian.
Wow, so a lot of heavy hitters.
Exactly. And together, they methodically deconstruct the most endlessly repeated narratives about the region.
So for the roadmap today, we are going to literally unearth the ancient archaeological evidence first.
Because we have to know who was actually standing on the dirt thousands of years ago.
Yeah. Exactly. You have to start with the dirt. From there, we will look at how the maps were drawn in the 20th century. Like who got what and why.
Crucial context.
Right. Then we are going to decode the complex psychological and religious layers that fuel the modern ideology you see on, college campuses today. And finally, and I think this is probably the most important part, we are going to highlight some incredibly uplifting, vital humanitarian work happening on the ground right now that completely transcends all of this conflict.
It is a massive undertaking, for sure. But, understanding the deep past is the absolute prerequisite for decoding the headlines of the present.
You literally can't understand it otherwise.
No, you can't. Like you said, if you don't know the first 2 hours of the movie, you cannot possibly understand the ending.
So let's get our hands dirty.
Let's do it.
To understand the present, we really have to start by digging into the dirt of the region to address what is arguably the most pervasive claim circulating right now.
You mean the colonialism argument?
Yes, the idea that Israel is a quote-unquote colonial state.
Right.
And to tackle this, our sources lean heavily on the work of federal district judge Roy Allman. He evaluates the historical claims against the Jewish state through the strict, rigorous lens of legal reasoning.
And what is so fascinating about Judge Allman's approach is the standard of evidence he applies.
Tell me more about that.
Well, think about how a courtroom operates, right?
Yeah.
If a plaintiff comes in and tells a compelling story, the court listens.
Here.
But the court doesn't just take their word for it. They look for objective, independent, third-party corroboration to rule out inherent bias.
Because everyone is biased about their own story.
Exactly. And Judge Allman applies this exact uncompromising legal standard to the colonialism myth. He presents what he terms his 3 buckets of evidence to refute it.
3 buckets, okay.
Yeah, these buckets are rocks in the ground, words on the page, and blood in the veins.
Okay, I love that framework. Let's start with the rocks, which really just means the archaeological and historical timeline. The sources lay out a timeline that completely cures that historical whiplash we talked about earlier. When you look at the dates, it's actually staggering.
It really puts things in perspective.
It does. The historical and archaeological record presented shows Joshua entering the land of Israel around 1400 BC.
Wow, 1400 BC.
Yeah. And then the Kingdom of David is founded around 1000 BC.
Okay.
The first Temple of Solomon is built roughly 957 BC, the second temple in 515 BC, and then the Hasmonean dynasty, which, by the way, was a period of independent Jewish self-rule, is founded in 166 BC.
And we really need to pause here and put those dates in perspective for you.
Yeah, please do.
Because the sources point out that Islam, which is the religion of the Palestinian Arabs, was not founded until the 7th century AD.
Wait, AD?
Yes, AD. That is roughly the year 610 AD.
Oh, wow.
So we are talking about a continuous, documented Jewish presence, statecraft, language, and culture occurring literally thousands of years before the advent of the religion that currently claims historical exclusivity over that very same territory.
Yeah, right. Thousands of years. Which leads directly to Judge Allman's second bucket, words on the page.
This part is so interesting.
I found this specific legal framework absolutely riveting, honestly. Because he doesn't focus on Jewish texts saying the Jews lived there.
No, that would be biased.
Exactly. He focuses entirely on documentary proof written by Israel's ancient adversaries.
Because that is the absolute gold standard of evidence. Allman points out that in legal theory, if a party says something favorable to its own claim, you listen, but you naturally take it with a grain of salt.
Right, of course they would say that. It benefits them.
Exactly. However, when a party's adversary says something favorable to your claim, you give it immense weight.
Because why would they lie to help you?
Right. You would never expect your mortal enemy to meticulously document facts that actually prove your case.
And the sources note that the ancient world was full of, meticulous record keepers who also just happened to be brutal conquerors.
They love their paperwork.
They really did. For thousands of years, the invading Romans, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, they took really detailed administrative notes about the people they were conquering, taxing, and, well, killing.
Yeah, very dark, but very well documented.
Very. And all of these ancient enemies explicitly recorded that the people living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea were Hebrew-speaking Jews who practiced the Judaic religion.
Exactly. The Assyrian reliefs, the Babylonian chronicles, the Roman records. I mean, none of them mention a demographic of people called Palestinians practicing Islam in the year 500 BC or 100 AD.
Because Islam didn't exist yet.
Right. They mention the Jews, which leads us into the fascinating and somewhat dark history of the word Palestine itself.
Oh, yeah. Let's get into this.
One of our historical sources breaks down exactly how this specific name came to be applied to the region.
Because it wasn't always called Palestine.
Not at all. For centuries, the region was known natively and internationally as Judea, which literally translates to the land of the Jews.
Okay, so I want to understand the mechanism here. How does a region universally known as the land of the Jews suddenly get a completely different name, a name that is now used to argue the Jews don't belong there?
It's a crazy story. It traces back to the year 134 AD.
Okay, 134 AD.
Right. The Jewish population in Judea staged this massive, fierce uprising against the occupying Roman Empire.
Like a rebellion.
Exactly. This is known to history as the Bar Kokhba Revolt. And the Roman emperor at the time, Hadrian, was absolutely furious.
I bet.
It took immense Roman resources to crush this rebellion. So when the Romans finally defeated the revolt, they didn't just want to punish the people. They wanted to punish the very memory of the nation.
Like a total psychological erasure.
Precisely. It was incredibly calculated. As a deliberate insult, the Romans expelled a large portion of the Jewish population, though. It's crucial to note a continuous Jewish presence always remained.
Right. They didn't get everyone.
But they expelled a lot of them. And then they officially renamed the entire region. They actually dug into the ancient biblical texts, identified the historical, extinct ancient enemies of the Israelites.
Which were who?
The Philistines, a seafaring people from the Aegean. And they renamed Judea to Syria Palestina.
Wow.
which eventually anglicized to Palestine.
That is just an unbelievable piece of context.
Isn't it?
The very name Palestine was essentially a punitive Roman label. It was explicitly designed to sever the Jewish connection to the land by naming it after their ancient enemies.
A literal insult etched into the map.
If you think about it, that is a highly successful ancient form of information warfare.
Oh, totally.
If you violently rename a place and force the world to use that new map, eventually generations forget what it was originally called.
It obscures the origins of the region for millennia. And, this historical reality brings us back to the legal definition of colonialism that Judge Allman completely dismantles.
Yeah, I want to push back on the way the word colonialism is thrown around today, because it feels incredibly intellectually lazy when you actually look at these facts.
It really is.
The sources bring up great examples of actual colonialism, like English kings who speak English and practice Anglican Christianity crossing an ocean to rule Virginia.
Right, totally disconnected from the land.
Or Spanish monarchs speaking Spanish and practicing Catholicism, conquering the Incas in Peru. But let's use a modern analogy that the sources hint at.
Okay.
Imagine if a group of Native Americans, let's say the Cherokee, who had been violently expelled from their ancestral lands in the American South, finally managed to return generations later.
Okay, following you.
They return, they buy land, and they reestablish a sovereign community there. Nobody in their right mind would call the Cherokee colonizers of Georgia or North Carolina.
Because colonialism inherently relies on foreign imposition.
Exactly.
It requires a complete disconnect between the ruling power and the indigenous culture of the land they're extracting resources from.
Right, so the analogy poses this unavoidable question. If the people living in this land 2,000 years ago spoke the Hebrew language, practiced the Judaic religion, and passed down the exact same names to their children.
Names like David, Simon, Benjamin.
Right. Names like Daniel, just as Jewish families do in the modern state of Israel today. How does the legal definition of colonialism even begin to apply?
It doesn't fit the legal criteria at all.
You cannot colonize the land your own ancestors are indigenous to, where they built the foundational structures speaking the exact same language.
It is a contradiction in terms. And, that indigenous reality is fully corroborated by Judge Allman's third bucket.
Oh, right, the blood in the veins.
Yes, blood in the veins. The sources highlight that over the last few decades, highly advanced genetic studies have been conducted on almost every major Jewish population dispersed globally.
Whether they ended up in Eastern Europe or North Africa or the Middle East.
Exactly. And the objective scientific consensus confirms that these dispersed populations are genetically connected. Their distinct lineage traces directly back to the Middle East, specifically to the Levant, exactly 2,000 years ago.
So you have the rocks in the ground, the texts written by ancient enemies, and the literal DNA of the people all pointing to the exact same undeniable conclusion.
The evidence is just overwhelming.
The colonial narrative simply collapses upon contact with this level of multidisciplinary evidence.
It really does.
But, that leaves a massive gaping question for you, the listener, to consider.
What's that?
If the ancient history is so thoroughly documented, how did the modern map become such a source of intense geopolitical dysfunction?
That is the big question. And to answer that, we have to look at the map drawing of the 20th century.
Right, skipping ahead a bit.
Yeah, we moved from the fall of the Roman Empire to the fall of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. The Ottoman Turks had controlled the broader Middle East for roughly 400 years. When they were defeated, the international community, through the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations, they had to decide how to administer these vast, newly liberated territories.
And the League of Nations gave the British Empire a mandate over the specific territory we are discussing today.
Right.
And the explicit, legally binding purpose of this mandate, known as the British Mandate for Palestine, was to create a Jewish national home.
It was international law. It was written down.
It was official.
But the reality of British geopolitical maneuvering complicated things immensely.
How so?
Well, the sources detail how the British had this massive political debt. During World War I, Arab forces had assisted the British in fighting the Ottomans.
Oh, okay.
So to reward their Arab allies, particularly the Hashemite family, the British took 70%, roughly two-thirds of the land that was explicitly mandated for the Jewish national home.
Wait, 70%?
70%. They sliced it off with a pen and created what is today the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.
I really want you to visualize this. Imagine a pie that the international community said was for a Jewish state.
Okay.
Before the state is even born, the British take 70% of that pie away and give it to an Arab monarch.
Just hand it over.
This is a crucial historical fact that is almost completely omitted from modern discourse. The vast majority of the original Palestine Mandate was already given over to create an Arab state.
It's just forgotten history.
It really is. The remaining sliver of land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean was what the Jewish people eventually declared independence on in 1948.
And the events surrounding that 1948 Declaration of Independence are another massive point of historical distortion that our sources methodically clarify.
Yeah, let's unpack that.
The popular narrative you hear chanted at protests is that in 1948, Israel was born and immediately brutally expelled all the Palestinian Arabs.
But the historical record, and we are talking about newspapers, radio broadcasts, and UN debates from the exact time, paints a starkly different picture.
Very different.
So what actually happened when Israel declared its independence?
According to the sources, the moment Israel declared independence, the surrounding Arab states, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq, immediately declared war.
Just immediately.
Immediately. And their stated public intention was not to establish boundaries. It was to completely annihilate the new Jewish nation and drive the population into the sea.
Wow. And what happened to the Arab inhabitants living within the borders of the new Israeli state during this?
The Arab League, the coalition of invading armies, actively ordered the Arab inhabitants of the region to leave their homes and get out of the line of fire.
So the armies told them to leave?
Yes. The mechanism here is crucial to understand. The Arab leaders broadcast messages telling the local Arab population to clear the way so that the invading Arab armies could quickly wipe out the Jewish forces.
That's incredibly cynical.
And the promise was that these residents could return to their homes a few weeks later, once the new state of Israel was destroyed.
But Israel survived.
They did.
Against all odds, they won the defensive war. And the Arabs who had fled, effectively siding with the foreign nations attempting to annihilate the new state, were generally not allowed back in.
Right.
However, the sources point out an incredible contrast that shatters the whole ethnic cleansing narrative.
What's that?
In the very midst of this existential onslaught, Israel's Declaration of Independence explicitly appealed to the Arab inhabitants of the state to stay.
It is written directly into their founding document.
Exactly. They asked the Arab residents to preserve peace and to participate in the upbuilding of the state on the basis of full and equal citizenship.
And those who did stay and did not join the invading forces, they became full citizens of Israel.
Right.
Today, their descendants make up the 20% Arab population of Israel.
But the aftermath of that 1948 war created what the sources called the refugee anomaly. And this is where the geopolitics get incredibly cynical. The war created displaced persons on both sides, but the international response was entirely asymmetrical.
It really was. Between 1948 and 1951, over 800,000 Jews were systematically expelled from various Arab lands across the Middle East.
Wait, 800,000?
Yeah, from Iraq, from Egypt, from Yemen. Communities that had lived there for centuries were stripped of their property, their bank accounts, and just forced to flee for their lives.
And what happened to those 800,000 Jewish refugees? Israel, a tiny, impoverished, newly formed nation that had just lost 1% of its population fighting for its life, absorbed them.
Just took them all in.
They took them in, built transit camps, and eventually integrated them fully into their society. The crisis was solved.
Exactly. Solved. Meanwhile, the hundreds of thousands of Arab residents who left Israel were treated radically differently by their own Arab brethren.
In what way?
They were refused citizenship by neighboring, culturally and linguistically identical Arab countries like Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan.
Wow.
Instead of absorbing them, these countries purposefully kept them confined in refugee camps.
Wait, pause. I really need to understand the logic here. Why would Lebanon or Syria purposefully trap their own culturally identical Arabic-speaking neighbors in squalid refugee camps for decades?
It seems backwards, right?
Yeah. What is the geopolitical benefit of that?
Well, the sources argue it was a deliberate, calculated strategy to keep the crisis alive. If you integrate the refugees, the conflict is over.
Right. People get jobs, they buy houses, they move on.
Exactly. But by keeping them stateless, the surrounding Arab nations maintained a permanent, highly visible grievance. It became a geopolitical weapon, a stick with which to beat Israel on the international stage endlessly.
And this cynical strategy resulted in a UN policy that is utterly unparalleled in human history.
Unparalleled is the right word.
The sources highlight that Palestinian refugee status is uniquely hereditary. It is passed down to children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. How does the UN justify this legally? If my grandfather fled a war in Europe, and I am born safely in America 50 years later, no international body considers me a refugee.
It is entirely unique to this one conflict. There is one UN agency for all the refugees in the rest of the world, the UNHCR, which focuses on resettling people.
Okay.
And there is a completely separate agency, UNRWA, exclusively for Palestinians, which focuses on maintaining their refugee status indefinitely.
Wow.
Because of this unique hereditary rule, the number of Palestinian refugees has artificially swelled from roughly 700,000 in 1948 to over 7 million today.
It is literally a self-perpetuating demographic weapon.
Exactly.
The longer time goes on, the larger the refugee population grows, making a practical resolution completely impossible.
That's the design.
And the sources point out that this strategic manipulation of identity culminated in a massive geopolitical shift in the year 1964.
This is a critical historical juncture, actually. The historian source asserts that the distinct Palestinian national identity, in the way it is deployed politically today, was formulated in 1964.
Okay, this was a massive revelation to me when reading the sources. How exactly does a national identity get formulated in a specific year?
It sounds like a conspiracy, but it's documented.
Right. Who was involved?
The actors involved are the KGB, the Soviet Union's intelligence agency.
Wait, the KGB?
Yes, working directly with Yasser Arafat and the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization.
But why would the Soviet intelligence apparatus care about this specific conflict in the Middle East? What is the mechanism of their involvement?
It all comes down to Cold War propaganda.
Oh, okay.
In the 1950s and early 60s, Israel was immensely popular in the West, particularly in the United States. They were viewed as the ultimate underdog.
Sure.
You have this tiny democratic nation, largely formed by Holocaust survivors, surrounded by massive hostile empires intent on their destruction. It was a biblical David versus Goliath story, and the West loved Israel.
Right, everyone loves an underdog.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union, seeking to undermine American allies in the region, realized they had a severe narrative problem. They understood that the Western psyche fundamentally roots for the underdog.
So if Westerners naturally love an underdog, the Soviet mechanism was to engineer an even smaller underdog to fight the Western ally.
Yes.
It's like political astroturfing on a global scale.
Precisely. The Soviet propaganda machine helped draft charters and craft an entirely new narrative. By rebranding the regional Arab population not just as Arabs, but specifically as Palestinians, a distinct, stateless indigenous people oppressed by the Israeli war machine, they successfully inverted the global narrative.
That is wild.
Israel was recast from the scrappy survivor into the lumbering, oppressive Goliath, and the newly minted Palestinian identity became the David.
It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. And, to really test the validity of this theory, the sources point to a glaring historical blind spot regarding the concept of occupation.
Right. Let's talk about occupation.
Because this is the buzzword that drives almost all the modern protests. But let's look at the map between 1948 and 1967.
Okay. During those 19 years, the Gaza Strip was completely occupied and administered by the military of Egypt.
Egypt.
Yes. And the West Bank, which we established was historically called Judea and Samaria, was completely occupied and annexed by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.
So during those nearly 2 decades of Egyptian and Jordanian military occupation, how many international protests were there demanding a free Palestinian state?
None.
How many UN resolutions condemned Egypt for occupying Gaza?
According to the historical record, 0. There was no international outcry. The Arab League was not demanding a Palestinian state in the West Bank. College campuses in the West were not shutting down to demand Jordan leave Judea and Samaria.
So if the issue is truly fundamentally about the indigenous people needing a sovereign state free from foreign occupation, why did the world and the Arab nations themselves completely ignore the Egyptian and Jordanian occupations?
It's a huge contradiction.
Why did the demand for a Palestinian state in those specific territories only become an international emergency after Israel took control of them in the defensive Six-Day War of 1967?
That contradiction is the crux of the entire conflict.
All right.
And answering it requires us to look beyond land, borders, and international law and look straight into the dark engine of ideology and religion.
Right.
But before we cross that bridge and unpack that ideological alliance, I believe we need to take a quick moment to pause our historical timeline and speak directly to you about something truly important happening in the present.
You are absolutely right. We've been dissecting the heavy, often cynical machinations of empires and geopolitics today. But throughout this deep dive, our sources also passionately highlight the incredible life-saving work being done by humanitarian organizations on the ground right now.
It's so vital.
Organizations like CBN Israel and the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. While the politicians argue over lines on a map, these organizations are providing vital, unconditional relief. We're talking hot meals, advanced medical care, and safe shelter to people in desperate need. They are actively transcending all the political noise we've been discussing. I highly encourage you, our listener, to take a minute and visit their websites to see how you can support these vital relief efforts.
Also, do not forget to check the episode description for more resources that can help you grow in your spirit, mind, and body.
Okay, let's dive back in.
Ready?
We left off with a massive logical contradiction. Why was the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank totally acceptable to the international community when it was perpetrated by Egypt and Jordan, but considered a supreme crime against humanity when Israel took control of those same territories in 1967?
Right. And the sources argue that to truly understand this, you cannot look at it through a Western political lens.
You just can't.
You have to look at the religious texts and theological frameworks that motivate the primary actors in the region. One of the sources points directly to the Quran, specifically chapter 2, verse 191.
And what does it say?
It states, "Drive them out from where they drove you out."
Wow. And the sources contextualize this with a broader Islamic theological concept known as the Waqf.
Yes.
Can you explain the mechanism of how that belief operates regarding land?
Yes. In traditional Islamic theology, there's a concept that any land that was once conquered by and placed under Islamic rule becomes a waqf.
A Waqf.
Right, an inalienable religious endowment. It belongs to Islam forever. It cannot be permanently ceded to non-Muslims.
Ah, okay. So when Jordan occupied the West Bank and Egypt occupied Gaza, it wasn't viewed as a crisis by the regional powers because Jordan and Egypt are Muslim nations.
Exactly. The land was still under Islamic control.
The core grievance, according to this analysis, has never actually been about drawing borders for a new independent state.
No, not at all.
It is a fundamental theological rejection of a non-Muslim state, specifically a Jewish state existing on what is considered eternal Islamic land.
That reframes the entire history of the peace process, honestly.
It really does. It explains why every single peace offer, from the Camp David summits to the Oslo Accords, to the unprecedented offers made by Israeli prime ministers in 2000 and 2008.
Were they offered what, up to 98% of the disputed territory?
Yes, up to 98% of the disputed territory, plus land swaps for a Palestinian state. And it has been uniformly rejected.
Every single time.
If the underlying theological premise is that Israel has no right to exist on any square inch of the land, then no compromise on borders will ever be acceptable.
Which brings us to one of the most perplexing phenomena discussed in the sources.
The modern campus alliance.
Yes. The sources describe a strange marriage currently operating in Western institutions between Marxist ideology and Islamist ideology.
This is a wild connection to make, because on the surface, these two groups should despise each other.
You would think so.
You have Western secular Marxists who generally despise traditional religion, allying with fundamentalist Islamists who despise secular Western values. How does this alliance actually work?
They have entirely different end goals, but they are united by a shared, incredibly rigid, binary worldview.
Okay, breaking things down into two groups.
Right. Both ideologies operate on a strict oppressor versus oppressed framework. In the Marxist academic lens, society is divided strictly into the powerful and the powerless, the white colonizer and the brown colonized.
Nuance is just gone.
Completely discarded. Deep historical context, objective truth, they are often discarded in favor of fitting every conflict into this rigid binary.
And the sources argue that both ideologies share a fundamental desire to dismantle Western civilization as it currently exists, so they form an alliance of convenience.
Exactly.
The Marxist framework provides the sophisticated academic vocabulary, weaponize words like apartheid, genocide, and colonialism to legitimize the Islamist goal of removing Israel, which, is viewed as a pillar of Western democracy in the Middle East.
Let's examine the mechanism of that specific word, apartheid.
Yeah, that's thrown around a lot.
Constantly on social media. But Judge Allman and the other sources completely dismantle this claim using simple demographic facts.
Let's hear them.
To understand why it's false, we first need to define what apartheid actually was.
In South Africa.
Right. In South Africa, apartheid was a systemic legal framework where the white minority stripped the black majority of their citizenship, right to vote, freedom of movement, and access to equal courts.
Right, that's the actual definition. And then the sources point out the demographic reality of modern Israel.
Which is completely different.
20% of Israel's citizens are Arab. They are not second-class citizens living under a separate legal system. They enjoy equal rights under the law. They have robust representation in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. They serve as prominent judges on the Israeli Supreme Court. They are doctors, lawyers, and military officers.
Now compare that to the territories governed by the Palestinian Authority or Hamas.
The contrast is insane.
The sources note a chilling statistic. There are 0 Jews living under Palestinian rule. 0.
Oh.
Furthermore, the Palestinian Authority explicitly states that any future Palestinian state must be entirely ethnically cleansed of Jews.
So let's process what this actually means.
Let's do it.
The state with a 20% Arab population that serves on its Supreme Court is routinely labeled an apartheid state by Western academics.
Yep.
While the government that legally demands an ethnically pure territory without a single Jew is hailed as a righteous liberation movement.
It is a complete inversion of reality.
I just have to point out the absolute irony here. We are watching college students actively protesting in favor of fundamentalist regimes under which they, the students, would personally lose all of their democratic rights.
It's tragic, honestly.
We are talking about students championing organizations that, under their strict religious laws, would brutally suppress the very freedoms of speech, expression, LGBTQ rights, and religious liberty that allow these students to pitch their tents and protest in the first place.
The irony is lost on them.
Are we essentially watching a massive fundamental misunderstanding of the Middle East, filtered entirely through a Western Americanized lens of social justice?
The sources strongly assert that we are. We are collectively projecting our own domestic historical guilt, our legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, and our own sociological frameworks onto a region that operates on a completely different set of ancient historical and religious imperatives.
We're applying the wrong map to the territory.
Exactly. And this academic misunderstanding leads directly to the modern battlefield, where this framework is violently weaponized.
Let's talk about how this academic theory manifests when real-world violence breaks out, because the sources argue that this powerful combination of ancient religious ideology and modern Marxist frameworks has created a uniquely sophisticated and incredibly dark media landscape.
We see this propaganda machine operate most clearly in the aftermath of October 7th.
Oh, man, yeah.
The sources recount the absolute unfiltered horror of those attacks. 1,200 innocent people butchered in their homes. Systemic sexual violence documented by independent agencies.
Unspeakable stuff.
Over 250 hostages dragged into tunnels, including infants, young women, and Holocaust survivors.
But the sources also highlight something truly terrifying that happened almost immediately.
It was so fast.
Before the Israeli military response even truly began, vast swaths of Western media, international institutions like the UN, and university campuses began engaging in rapid moral inversion.
They completely flipped the script.
They began framing the victims of the attack as the historical aggressors who brought it upon themselves, and the perpetrators as justified resistance fighters reacting to oppression.
Judge Allman explicitly asks the reader, where did that moral distortion come from so quickly?
Because it happened overnight.
It strongly suggests a sophisticated propaganda apparatus that was pre-planned. It was ready to deploy terminology that would instantly activate that Marxist oppressor-oppressed reflex in the Western media class.
And the sources give us a textbook step-by-step example of how this media manipulation works in real time.
The Ali Hospital incident.
Yes, the Al-Ali hospital incident. I remember when this happened, and it is vital we break down the mechanics of how this lie spread.
Shortly after the conflict began, major global news agencies from the New York Times to the BBC published glaring headlines claiming that an intentional Israeli airstrike had hit the Al-Ali hospital in Gaza, killing 500 civilians instantly.
The story went around the world at the speed of light.
It was everywhere.
It sparked massive, violent riots outside embassies in the Middle East. It fueled immediate UN condemnations and completely derailed diplomatic summits.
But the sources point out that when the actual intelligence and physical evidence came out days later, it revealed a completely different reality.
What was the reality?
It wasn't an Israeli bomb. Radar and video evidence proved it was an errant, misfired rocket launched from within Gaza by a terrorist group called Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Wow.
And it didn't even hit the hospital building. It hit the adjacent parking lot.
So the hospital was fine?
Yes. And it didn't kill 500 people. Independent intelligence estimates suggested a fraction of that number.
But the lie had already done its job.
Absolutely.
It had traveled halfway around the world while the truth was still lacing up its boots. And this highlights a deeper tactical issue analyzed by our sources, the strategy of deceit in asymmetric warfare.
It's a formal strategy.
One source quotes the Islamic historical concept that war is deceit. It suggests that manipulating information, inflating numbers, and lying to the infidel is viewed not as a moral failing, but as a legitimate, necessary military tactic.
Which forces us to ask, who was the source for that initial claim of 500 dead at the hospital?
Every major newspaper cited the Gaza Health Ministry.
And the sources make a point that every consumer of news needs to internalize. The Gaza Health Ministry is not an independent branch of doctors.
Right. It's not like the Red Cross.
No. It is entirely run and controlled by Hamas. There is no independent medical reporting agency or free press allowed to operate there.
I just have to ask, why do legacy media outlets who pride themselves on fact-checking just print casualty numbers provided by a designated terror organization?
It is a combination of things. The intense pressure of the 24-hour news cycle, the lack of independent journalists on the ground who can verify without Hamas escorts, and an ideological blind spot that assumes the oppressed party must be telling the truth.
Just assuming they're honest because they're the underdog.
Exactly. And this leads to a grim discussion about military strategy. The sources detail the mechanism of how Hamas operates. They intentionally embed their military headquarters, their rocket launchers, and their ammunition depots deep within and beneath civilian infrastructure.
Hospitals, UN schools, mosques.
Right, and densely populated residential buildings.
Which, under international law, is a double war crime.
This it is.
You are actively targeting enemy civilians with rockets while simultaneously using your own civilians as human shields to protect your assets. But the sources explain the chilling, calculated logic behind this.
It's not an accident.
No, they do this specifically to draw retaliatory fire from Israel. They want the visual of destroyed civilian infrastructure. They actually desire the civilian casualties.
Because in the modern media landscape, those civilian casualties can be geopolitically monetized.
Monetized. That's a dark way to put it, but it's true.
It is. When Israel strikes a rocket launcher hidden in an apartment building, the resulting civilian deaths generate intense sympathy and outrage in the West. That outrage translates directly into political pressure on Israel from its allies to stop its defensive operations, allowing Hamas to survive.
Wow.
Furthermore, the destruction guarantees massive influxes of rebuilding funds from international bodies like the UN, which Hamas then siphons off to build more military tunnels.
It is just a cynical strategy that turns the deaths of their own civilians into their most potent geopolitical asset.
The sources actually make a very provocative speculation here.
What's that?
They suggest that taking Hamas casualty numbers at face value is the historical equivalent of trusting the WWII Nazi propaganda ministry for accurate casualty counts of German citizens during the bombing of Dresden.
That is an intense comparison.
It is. But it forcefully urges you, the listener, to critically examine the source of the statistics flashing across your screens.
If the data comes exclusively from an organization whose stated chartered goal is the violent annihilation of their neighbor, why is it printed as objective, unverified fact in the morning paper?
It demands a level of media literacy, critical thinking, and historical grounding that is unfortunately lacking in much of our public discourse today.
Yeah, we really need to do better there.
However, as heavy, cynical, and fraught as this geopolitical analysis is, the sources absolutely do not leave us in the dark.
No, they don't. And this is where the narrative makes a profound shift and where I think the most important takeaways of this entire deep dive lie.
The positive side.
Yes, because while the macro-level political and media landscapes are drowning in deception and violence, the sources highlight incredible bright spots of hope and truth happening on the ground level.
It's really refreshing.
We must look at the humanitarian action that completely transcends these artificially constructed academic divisions.
The sources share a deeply moving, extensively documented story about a family living in the region, Haneen and Jamal.
Right. They are a traditional Muslim family. And their young son, Mohammed, suffers from a rare, practically incurable kidney disease.
It's a heartbreaking situation.
The sources describe the agonizing daily reality for this family. Mohammed is tethered to an IV, requiring constant, expensive medication and highly specialized nutrition just to survive another week.
The financial and emotional burden on this family was absolutely crushing.
I can't even imagine.
Jamal, the father, was working exhaustingly long hours as a janitor cleaning a building where an Arab Christian group happened to meet.
And through that simple workplace connection, Jamal's desperate situation was referred to CBN Israel, a Christian humanitarian organization operating in the region.
Yes.
And this is where the entire paradigm of the conflict shifts.
Huh.
CBN Israel stepped in and provided comprehensive, sustained support.
They just showed up.
They filled the family's shelves with necessary groceries. They helped pay the mounting, impossible medical bills, and they eased the crushing debt that was destroying the family.
And the most crucial detail here, the mechanism of their charity.
What do you mean?
They did this without any religious test or political prerequisite.
Oh, wow.
They didn't ask Jamal to renounce his faith. They didn't ask for his political opinions on borders. They simply saw a family made in the image of God, suffering immensely, and they stepped in with unconditional love and tangible financial rest.
That is beautiful. Haneen, the mother, spoke about the profound physical peace this brought to their household, allowing them to finally focus on the hope ahead rather than the agonizing crisis of today.
When you put Haneen and Jamal's story next to all the heavy, cynical political theory we just analyzed, it completely shatters that Marxist oppressor-oppressed framework, doesn't it?
Completely shatters it.
The macro ideologies seek to divide humanity into rigid, irreconcilable categories: colonizer and colonized, believer and infidel. But this humanitarian aid proves that on the ground, the love of God and the preservation of human life completely supersedes those academic labels.
It is the ultimate counter-narrative. It proves that coexistence isn't just a political buzzword, it is a daily practice. And this theme of transcending malicious labels applies to another deeply positive historical thread in the sources regarding the American Jewish experience.
Right, let's touch on that.
Judge Allman directly addresses the ugly, persistent myth of dual loyalty that is often thrown at Jewish citizens in America.
It is an ancient anti-Semitic trope, really. The idea that Jewish Americans cannot be fully trusted as citizens because their true secret allegiance always lies with a foreign power, specifically Israel.
It's awful.
Judge Allman powerfully and very emotionally refutes this by sharing his own deeply personal origin story.
It is such a beautiful story about what America actually means. He describes immigrating to America from Venezuela as a young boy, noting his family's complex Venezuelan and Mexican Jewish roots.
Right.
And he talks about how his parents, having escaped instability, were fiercely determined to instill a profound love and understanding of American democracy in him.
They wanted him to really get it.
They didn't just lecture him about it, they physically showed him. Every family vacation, they would pile into a red Toyota minivan and drive across the American South, specifically to visit historical sites.
He recalls a very specific memory, actually.
The one in Tennessee.
Yes. He was an 8-year-old boy standing on top of Missionary Ridge in Tennessee, which was the site of a major bloody Civil War battle.
Okay.
It was snowing. The first time this young immigrant boy from South America had ever seen snow, he thought it was just a fun, scenic trip.
Naturally, he's 8.
But his father stopped him right there in the snow and delivered a stern, foundational lesson. He told his son that they didn't bring him there just for a fun vacation. They brought him there so he could intimately understand the character and the cost of the country that had just given them refuge.
That gets me chills.
His father pointed out across the battlefield that 600,000 men had to die in a brutal civil war so that a part of the country that was enslaved could finally be free.
His father taught him that a free and fair democracy isn't just a given. It demands a supreme level of devotion, sacrifice, and dedication.
Exactly.
Judge Allman uses this deeply moving personal history to emphatically state that he is, first and foremost, an American. His dedication to the rule of law is an American dedication. And the sources point out that this fierce patriotic loyalty is true of the vast, vast majority of Jews in America.
Furthermore, the sources delve into the deep historical contributions of Jewish patriots to the very founding of the United States. It goes back long before modern geopolitics.
Yes. The mention of Haym Salomon is incredible.
Tell us about him.
During the darkest days of the Revolutionary War, when George Washington's army was freezing and starving, Haym Salomon, a Jewish immigrant from Poland, personally bankrolled the American Revolution.
Just personally funded it.
He was one of the most successful financiers in the colonies, and he brokered massive loans and gave his own vast personal sums to the nascent American government and military.
That's amazing.
And here's the kicker-ess. He died Essentially penniless because he refused to ask the early, struggling American government to pay him back.
Oh, wow.
He viewed it as his duty to pay his wealth forward to secure the future prosperity and freedom of the new nation.
It completely shatters the dual loyalty libel. It provides undeniable historical proof that Jewish Americans have been foundational to the success, the survival, and the moral fabric of the United States from its very inception.
So when I look at all of this together, the ancient rocks, the complex maps, the cynical propaganda, and these deeply moving stories of humanity, it seems like the ultimate antidote to the ideology of destruction we talked about earlier is exactly this.
Yeah.
It is the tangible, unconditional building up of human life, like we see with CBN Israel, paired with a fierce, unwavering dedication to the actual documented history of our institutions.
It's about knowing the roots.
When you take the time to learn this rich, complex history, it doesn't just make you smarter for a dinner party conversation. It literally makes you immune to divisive propaganda.
That's the goal.
You can no longer be emotionally manipulated by a 15-second, highly edited social media video because your roots in the actual truth are simply too deep.
That is the very essence of being a well-informed citizen. It is not just about memorizing dates and facts. It is about having the structural framework to understand why certain narratives are built, how they are deployed, and ultimately who benefits from your emotional reaction to them.
Exactly. We have covered a massive amount of ground today, pulling up a lot of pavement. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder as you go about your day.
If the heavily edited narratives we consume so easily shape our entire reality, how many other historical truths accepted by the mainstream are actually carefully constructed stories designed to manipulate our empathy?
That's a great question.
Think about the map we discussed earlier. When you turn off the news, actually look at a globe and find the tiny nation of Israel, a country roughly the size of the state of New Jersey.
So small.
So small, its name often has to be written in the Mediterranean Sea with an arrow just pointing to it.
Yeah, that's true.
And you see that it is completely surrounded by massive, incredibly wealthy, oil-rich empires that span continents. It completely flips the underdog script you've been constantly sold. Truth requires us to zoom out, look at the map, look at the timeline, and evaluate the evidence for ourselves.
What an incredible perspective. Before we go, I want to remind you one last time, please take a moment to visit the websites of the humanitarian organizations we discussed today, like CBN Israel and the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. The geopolitical arguments and the academic debates will rage on indefinitely, but the ability to support life-saving, unconditional relief for real families on the ground is something you can actively participate in right now.
Thank you for listening to The Message. Now put all these ideas into action. Practice them daily. We trust your time was well spent with us today. Bye for now. Always remember, your health is your responsibility.